Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Film Buds Podcast. This is episode number 288, and my name is Henry. Just me this week. Elle has some stuff going on, but she'll fill you in about that next week when she's back, so sorry about that, but it's just me. Hope that's all right. This time around, got something a little bit different, as is the custom, I guess, now, for when we have these one-off episodes. This week, I'm going to be talking about two James Franco directed films, more specifically two films that he has adapted from classic literary works that were deemed unfilmable by many, and he has done quite a few of those over the last decade or so. Some to greater effect, some to lesser, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. So first, we're going to be doing Cormac McCarthy's Child of God, and then William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, which both came out in 2013, and also both star James Franco. So it should be a good time. I think they're pretty interesting movies, not necessarily that they're great movies, but I think there's a lot to say there, and I do want to try and get to a lot of the other ones that he's done since these two, maybe for a bonus show or something along those lines. So if you'd like to hear those reviewed as well, send us a message on social media at FilmBuds, Letterboxd, YouTube. And actually, that leads me into my big point or big piece of news. So our YouTube page, which has both Film Buds and Music Buds content there, and that link is in the show notes. We have now uploaded our entire catalog at this point, I believe, of Film Buds to our YouTube page. So basically, there's static video episodes. So if you like listening to us on YouTube more than you do on your iPhone or however it is that you're listening to it right now, you can check out our YouTube content there. And you can also comment on what you think of the episodes there. That's why I do like the YouTube medium, is because we can now have more people engaged with us and sharing and subscribing. So please like and subscribe to that YouTube page as well if you haven't already. And thank you to all those who have. So that's a really cool thing. Have been wanting to do that for a while. And I'm really happy because that's also been boosting our listenership a little bit more, even more. We've had quite a bump, which is something I feel like I say every week, but we've had more listeners over the last 6 months or so than we've probably ever had in the entire show. So I really appreciate that. We hope you'll stick around. Please subscribe, hit that subscribe button, rate, review, all that good stuff. So thanks once again. Love having you here. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's get into Cormac McCarthy's Child of God. And we do have a clip, so take a listen.
He was of German and Irish bloods. His name was Lester Ballard, a child of God, much like yourself, perhaps.
All right. So as I said, Child of God came out in 2013, is directed by James Franco. The script is adapted partly by James Franco, stars James Franco, as well as Scott Hayes, Tim Blake Nelson, Jim Perrick, Brian Lilly, not a lot of other big names. And the synopsis is a dispossessed, violent man's disastrous attempt to exist outside the social order. So Cormac McCarthy, if you're not familiar, he also wrote the novels No Country for Old Men, which the Coen brothers did, The Road, which John Hillcoat adapted, and he's done some others as well. He's one of the most legendary American writers of all time, and he did just pass away, I think, last year, but he's an amazing novelist. And he also wrote the screenplay of The Counselor, the Ridley Scott film. But this is one that I've only read bits and pieces of. I had heard about over the years when I was looking into more of Cormac McCarthy's work, and heard it was about a necrophiliac, if you weren't already aware. So I am curious to read the novel, but I'll get to that at some point when I'm in the right mood, as much as I can be. But starting off, James Franco, I really hate that his personal life has gone the way it has in terms of some of his choices away from Hollywood, because I grew up watching Spider-Man trilogy, Pineapple Express, 127 Hours. Like, I love James Franco. I think he's such a versatile, interesting, dynamic actor and producer and creator, really, in terms of the things he's written and directed and all that stuff. So I really hate that he has tarnished his reputation with both audiences in some ways, and then also with some of his artistic partners like Seth Rogen and other people like that. But purely just talking about his directorial work, such as this, there's not really anyone else out there like James Franco in terms of that. He has a master's degree, I believe, in English of some form, and he has done a lot of advanced education and other things like that, taught classes, but he clearly has a love for classic literature, and these movies are a great example of that, where he takes time after time after time, he spends his own money on buying the rights to these different works and adapting them and trying to be as faithful as possible to it. He's not creating some new crazy interpretation of it. He's just doing something as simply as he can and faithfully as he can, which not many other people do time after time like he has. And sadly, I think his direction needs some work, because there are a lot of these stories that they don't seem that unfilmable to me. They seem challenging, but they don't really seem unfilmable as some critics or whoever else deem them to be. I haven't read all of these novels that he's adapted, but even from watching them, they don't seem that crazy to adapt for the big screen. But circling back around, he's someone who does not need to do that. He clearly has enough money. He is a big star, so he has a lot of big projects that he could be doing, or more widely released indie films, as he's done a lot over the years. So he really is doing this out of his own passion for it, which comes across in some ways. I wish they were still better, but he has a love for this field and this medium and these classic works that not necessarily have been forgotten, but might otherwise be brushed under the rug or anything like that. So I really do respect him in that way. I don't respect him for any of his personal choices outside of Hollywood, but in terms of his direction, I really appreciate what he chooses to do, even if I don't always love him, because there's still something quite unique and refreshing and inspiring and passionate about all these movies, despite the inconsistency of them, so to speak. So this one I had heard about. This was one of his first, I guess, over the last decade. This is one of his bigger films that really launched him into doing more in this style. I knew it was about a necrophiliac. That was about it. I really love being from the South myself. I love stories that take place in the South, the deep South. It's just a setting, the different time periods that most filmmakers play with. It's something I'm just immediately drawn to for a variety of reasons. And I really like, even though I don't necessarily read a lot of classic literature frequently, I still have a great appreciation for it. And whenever someone tries to adapt it either very faithfully or in a new way, I'm usually pretty drawn to that. So this is right up my alley. Overall, and it goes back to his overall direction, I like the stories. I like this story in terms of its bizarre, dark, uncomfortable nature, because it is following this guy who is completely, as the synopsis says, is living outside of social order. He's pretty much nuts, and he finds these dead women out in the woods because of a variety of reasons, and he also kills people as well. But he ends up bringing them back to this shack where he lives out in the woods and defiles them to be delicate, which I can't really think of many other movies, if any, that deal with necrophilia, obviously for good reason, which I don't inherently mind that a movie is deciding to tackle that, or novel, whichever one. But with James Franco, his direction is so bland and, to be ironic, fairly directionless, because it feels like he just puts the camera there and says, all right, do stuff. You know, this is happening, that's happening. And there's not much flow. There's very languid kind of pacing and transitions throughout the story. So with a story that is so strange and disturbing, and one that's also very plotless, there are just times where I'm thinking, why are we watching this guy do this? Like, why do we care? Because I think in the original novel, considering Cormac McCarthy's reputation and what I've read of his, he always has a point. He has a lot of complexity, a lot of emotion and resonance and meaning and purpose to his stories, obviously, considering who he is. But in this, it feels like I was thinking, all right, what's the reason for this? Where are we leading to? What are you trying to say here? Rather than just adapt the story, which that can be a point on its own here. I want to bring a story or a novel that I love or that deserves to have more recognition to the big screen. Sure, that's fine. However, that doesn't inherently mean that it's going to be good or that we should care. Because while I like classic literature, I like Cormac McCarthy, I like stories that take place out in the South, I like stories about people who are, so to speak, out there. Not to say I agree with it, but just stories that are really dealing with the weird and the strange. I'm there for that, for better or worse. But in this, it really feels like, why are we following this guy? Why do we care? Why are we spending so much quiet time with this guy, thinking about him? And really, there's not much to say in terms of how James Franco presents it. I believe that there's more so in the novel, but that direction, as is the case with really all of his movies, doesn't come through the way that I think he thinks it does. There's just something missing. It doesn't feel really that thoughtful or that complex. It feels very, in some ways, lazy, very rushed, which he is so prolific that I'm sure he's doing a million things at once, and that can hurt the movie. So maybe if he took his time more, even if he had a small budget and not a lot of time, I think if he maybe focused a little bit more in one way or the other, these movies could be a little bit better, as opposed to doing 2 or 3 a year, something like that. So it is a little frustrating in the sense that I see the core story there, and I think it's something that could be something really shocking, but also very thoughtful and thought-provoking. Because if you look at the Coen Brothers and No Country for Old Men, one of the best films of that decade, in my opinion, and one of my favorite movies of all time. It's amazing. It's such a simple story. It's a dark story, and not really a lot happens, as is the case with this movie, but it's a insane level of difference in terms of quality, because the Coen Brothers have that finesse, that grace, and that complexity, and James Franco just doesn't for the most part. He gets some things accomplished, and I think Scott Hayes as the main character is amazing. He's so crazy and unsettling and has those sharp, piercing eyes, and you never really know what he's going to do next. So that performance, sadly, is way too good for this quality of movie. Like if you think of Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men or something like that, that's what Scott Hayes could be considered, I think, for a movie like this. But the movie around him does not do much good in terms of elevating that. And then other performances are good. James Franco, not much to his character, but he's all right. Tim Blake Nelson, I love. He can do anything, and he is meant for country rural roles. He can just do that so well. And if you look at some work he's done with the Coen Brothers and a lot of other people too, but he's amazing, so enjoyable, so charming and dark and weird, and does a very good job in this. The scenes where Scott Hayes is bringing these dead women back to his shack and doing bad stuff to them is very unsettling. And while there is surely that meaning in Cormac McCarthy's novel, you're watching that and it's hard to think, why are we spending this time here? I don't care about this guy. I don't want to watch that. If I have to, I'll watch it, but give me something to think about. Give me something to care about, to latch on to. And James Franco doesn't pull through in that way. So I still like the movie all right. It's not one I want to throw on, considering how dark and disturbing it is. But if you like Cormac McCarthy, if you like movies that take place out in the South about crime or thrillers or dramas, I would give it a look. I don't think it's ever going to grow on me so much that I think it's amazing, because there just isn't enough there to elevate it to being a great movie. But there are elements that I really like. It's got some good performances. I think it looks really good. I like the locations, good score. So there are good parts to it. I just, every time I watch it, which I've seen it twice now, I believe, I just wish it was a lot better than it is, as I'm sure most people do. But worth a watch. Just be ready for it, because it's not pleasant, not fun, not happy in any way, but an interesting story, and probably in the big scheme of things, one of his better movies direction-wise for Franco, but not to the point of something that I would ever put on a best of list or best of the year or anything like that. So, which is too bad. Well, that one is a 3 out of 5. All right, well, with that one done, let's get to our other review, which is William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, also from 2013. And we do have a clip. So take a listen.
Ready?
Yeah, if you're all hitched up.
You wait. If she don't last till you get back, she gonna be disappointed. I give her my word we keep the team here and ready in case she goes.
Ma ain't that shit.
That's right. She been acting more herself today than all week.
Yeah, well, you ought to know.
All right. So As I Lay Dying is, of course, directed by James Franco, co-written by James Franco, stars James Franco, as well as Tim Blake Nelson, Jim Perrick, Anna O'Reilly, Logan Marshall Green, Danny McBride. That's about it. And the synopsis is, based on the classic novel by William Faulkner, first published in 1930, As I Lay Dying is the story of the death of Addie Bundren and her family's quest to honor her last wish to be buried in the nearby town of Jefferson. Well, William Faulkner is someone who I've read a little bit of in school, not much more than that, I'm ashamed to say. He is someone who I still have the utmost respect for, and what I have read of his, I see why he is considered to be a classic writer and classic novelist. And that's also one of the reasons why I really appreciate James Franco for adapting these stories, because otherwise I probably would never have even heard of this book or of this story. So even if I don't love this movie, or if I don't go back and read all the novels 5 times through, I still really appreciate James Franco, despite its very limited audience. He's still bringing these classic stories to the big screen with a fairly decent cast, well-known cast. So it's not like a bunch of unknown actors, no budget, no release. He has a decent kind of market to it, even though obviously it's not going to do very well financially or ever have a big blockbuster audience, which is okay. But going into this, I didn't know anything about it, hadn't heard of it. I rewatched it for this. I had watched it around the time it came out for the first time. And it once again takes place in the Deep South, is super, super depressing and dark and uncomfortable. A different kind of story for sure than Child of God, but still a very grim, dense, mysterious Southern tale. Now, in terms of the differing quality, this is probably my favorite of the two. I don't think it's that good still. It's still quite flawed, in my opinion. And one interesting thing that took me by surprise totally going into it is there is a lot of split screen in the movie, more so in the first half or so, where there is that feeling of isolation, of, in some ways, almost like an imprisonment in terms of this world and being in that character's head and mind space. James Franco plays the most sympathetic of the crew, in my opinion. Logan Marshall Green, I first saw him in Prometheus. I think he's an awesome actor. I haven't seen all of his movies, but he is fantastic in this, and he completely, in my opinion, plays a Mississippi country boy perfectly. Tim Blake Nelson, of course, great. Danny McBride, pretty good. I don't mind him doing more dramatic roles. I really don't care about that. I think he can do it fairly well. He's all right in this, but if I had to choose someone who would be my least favorite, probably would be him, performance-wise. But the split screen doesn't always work. It's interesting and it's ambitious, and I think in comparison to Child of God, he had a little bit more of a direction in this and a purpose in this, as opposed to Child of God, which is more meandering. This, filmmaking-wise, story-wise, feels like there's more confidence. There's more of a grasp of the story and the narrative and the meaning. So all that I like a little bit more. It doesn't work inherently, the split screen, all the time, because there are points where I'm getting frustrated with it. I don't totally get the meaning of what he's trying to say with that, or why he's doing the split screen this moment or that moment, having points where there's something happening on one half of the screen and then the other half is black. That's one thing as well, which is interesting. So I applaud him for doing that. Doesn't mean I'm going to love it totally, but it's still interesting. It's different and it's ambitious, and I respect that. But the rest of the movie, same thing with Child of God. There is that, despite it being a little bit better quality-wise, direction-wise than that movie, there's still here's the camera, let's see what happens, start the scene. It doesn't really feel very good in terms of transitions and flow. It feels very sporadic and unengaged in terms of one scene to another. It's very broken apart. Not that I fault him entirely, considering the novel, from what I understand, is there's a bunch of narrators. It's a lot of different stuff going on all at once. So that goes into the unfilmable nature of it, I suppose. But nevertheless, whatever the original source material has structure-wise, it doesn't totally work in this movie. Sometimes it does, other times it doesn't. So it is a interesting yet flawed work. Probably, I've seen most of his directed works over the last decade. This would probably be my favorite, I think. I like Zeroville a lot as well. Still an interesting one, not for everyone for sure, nor is Child of God or really any of these movies that he's directed. Pretty much the only one that ever had a big, wide audience is The Disaster Artist, the A24 movie about the making of The Room, which I really like. Actually, no, that would be my favorite of all the ones he's done. I'd forgotten that. So that one, if you want to start with his movies, check that one out. But this one is very challenging. It's weird. It's grim, very cryptic, and there's a lot of poetic sort of monologues and voiceovers and all of that. So it's one that you really got to sit with. You got to be in the right mood for. I think of all the ways to adapt this and of all the people, he did a decent job. I would like to see someone else take a swing at it, because you never know. It would be pretty interesting to see different interpretations or different attempts. But for what it is, I like it. Not one I feel the need to revisit all that often, because it's so academic in some ways, if that makes sense. It doesn't always even feel totally like an actual movie. It feels more like disparate parts all smushed together, for better or for worse. But there's still a lot of meaning there. Doesn't totally come through on screen all the time, but there's still a lot of interesting ideas there, a lot of weight in terms of the family dynamics. The river sequence is really good. There's a lot of really dark, grim, unpredictable moments that he seems to have a pretty intense passion for delivering in terms of what he's choosing to include and not to include in his adaptations and scripts. Very good performances, as I said. Very unique, for better and for worse. Check it out if you want something very different. If you're curious about classic literature adaptations, if you like William Faulkner, if you like stories in the South and you want something different and weird and strange and dark, it's definitely got all of those elements for sure. Just not an amazing movie. I wish it was better. As I keep saying, there's greatness there, there's genius there, there's heart, but it's not to the level that it needs to be, or that it could be, rather. Because these are amazing masterworks, but if you watch this or you go into it not even knowing about the original novel, you may not necessarily see that greatness or understand why, oh, this is a classic piece of literature. I understand that now, or I need to read this. It feels more middle of the road and average. So that, in a way, all of these movies are a failure in that sense, but it's still respectable, and I appreciate it for what he's trying to do. The attempt can be enough on its own in some ways. So that one is a 3.5 out of 5. All right, well, let's end off with picks of the week. So I got a couple things here. I watched Charlie Says, which is directed by Mary Harron, who also directed American Psycho, which I love, as well as The Notorious Betty Page, which is also quite good. And this one is about Charlie Manson and the 3 women who followed him and helped commit the Manson murders, if you're unfamiliar with that, and everything surrounding Sharon Tate and all of those things, and who helped him commit other crimes as well in that same period. I don't know a lot about Charles Manson. I've seen some documentaries, some movies, but I'm very aware of what he did and the cult that he ran in many ways. This one, interestingly, is more about specifically one woman who was a young teenager, early 20s, who felt directionless. She had no real drive to do this or that, and she ended up meeting Charles Manson or friends of Charles Manson, got involved in the group, became basically brainwashed by him, and then met these other 2 women who were completely as Charles Manson did, completely brainwashed him into believing he was like a god, and everything he said was scripture, essentially, and everything that he preached was right and would create peace and all this, that, and the other, which of course was not true and completely ridiculous, but it really was a cult in a variety of ways. And if you don't know much about Charles Manson or the Manson family, as it was called, you can check that out. I would encourage you to do that just so you're aware of it. But the movie itself, I don't mind if they do something about Charles Manson, either from his point of view or from someone else's point of view. I appreciate that this is from the followers' point of view. And then there's the arc of them meeting him, not feeling any way towards him, and then being completely in love with him and his way of life. But by the end, not to spoil anything too much, but being imprisoned and having different perspectives on what they did and different perspectives on him. And all of this is a true story. So there are end credits about the real women and their involvement in the movie and how they felt about Charles Manson after years and years of being away from him and being in prison and rehab and all those things. So it's interesting. Sadly, though, it is nowhere near as good as something like American Psycho. It's all right. It's a slice of life, weird slice of life, and a good perspective on Manson, but it's fairly forgettable. There's not that much happening or going on. I feel like there's not a lot of commentary, really. Maybe there's a lot underneath that I'm just not getting, but there was some, just not enough and not as much as I thought it would be, being a film by Mary Herron. I feel like it's a little shallow, a little uninspired, I guess you could say. So not as good as I was hoping it would be. Still all right. And if you like true crime or are interested in Charles Manson in that time period, check it out. You could do worse, but it's not one that I would ever go back and watch again, I don't think, or would highly recommend. Then I rewatched the Elizabeth Moss film Her Smell, directed by Alex Ross Perry. And this is about a fictionalized version of someone like Courtney Love or Kurt Cobain. And the movie, very interestingly and ambitiously, tells the story in 5 distinct acts, where most things have 3, of course, where each one is really starting with her being pretty much insane, having this crazy mental breakdown, being all over the place. I mean, you name it, she just has this complete insanity to her. And then the next act is her trying to record the next album and having problems. And then there's this eventual decline and then rise up. So the 5 acts is really interesting. It's very well done. Each one is very distinctive and memorable. And Elizabeth Moss's performance, I loved her ever since I saw her in Mad Men. I think she's an amazing actor. She is incredible in this. It's one of her, if not her absolute best performance of her career so far. It is so underrated. I think the writing, the direction, the score, I actually interviewed the composer on the Music Buds, so check that out if you want to. But I love the punk rock world. I love stories about rock stars and artists and crazy creators. That's just my kind of thing, for better or for worse. And this is right up my alley. It might not be for everybody. It's very unsettling, very immersive and uncomfortable, but I would give it a look. It's deserving of more praise than I think it got, both the performance by Moss as well as the entire film in general, because there's a lot of great artistry and originality and ambition there. So one of the best, not biopics considering it's fictionalized, but I guess you can call it a music biopic, a fictional music biopic, one of the best that I've ever seen. And I will always revere Elizabeth Moss for that amazing performance, because there's so much variety and complexity. You name it, she probably does it in this movie in terms of emotional range. So it's incredible. And then last thing I watched for the first time, I watched The Descent from mid-2000s, which is about a group of cave divers, hikers, whatever you want to call them, who follow the lead of this experienced cave diver or explorer into the Appalachian Mountains. And they say, hey, let's try this unexplored one. We found this one. Let's do it. And then they get down there. And since there's a lot of twists and turns with this, I won't spoil anything just in case you haven't seen it. But a lot of things go wrong, and it ends up basically becoming Alien or even like a zombie movie in a cave, which is really interesting. It's very claustrophobic. It's unsettling. The use of light and shadows and darkness is incredible. The look of the demons, let's call them, is really good. It's very intense and chilling and unpredictable because most scenes are in quite a lot of darkness. You don't know where you are, nor do the characters. So all that plays to the movie's advantage in terms of horror and thrill. So it's quite good. Not a 5 out of 5, like I think some people will make it out to be, which I can understand that. But for me, first time watch didn't totally wow me, but there are some really intense, bone chilling moments, and it's very well directed, acted, very well shot. So it's up there for sure in terms of 2000s horror and supernatural sci-fi horror, whatever you want to classify it as. I would check it out. Just be ready because it's quite something. And that is about it, I think, for the show. Next week, as I said, Elle will be back. We'll be doing the Trolls franchise. I know I said that last week, but things came up and it ended up just being me this week. Hope that was all right. To reiterate, please check out our YouTube page, like and subscribe there. That's in the show notes. There will be a bonus show teaser released this Friday, and you can go to filmbuds.bandcamp.com to download about, I think, 70 bonus shows now. Follow us on social media, rate, review, subscribe. Follow us on Letterboxd if you have one. If you don't have an account, get one for sure. It's awesome. And yeah, hope you enjoy it even half as much as I did, and I'll see you next time, y'all.